the first Women's March held in Washington, D.C. was the first national march in D.C., and thousands of women marched for the right to vote. It was the eve of a Woodrow Wilson inauguration, and there were thousands of women, more than 250,000 onlookers. And it was a big event with floats and music and delegations from different states. That march was 1.2 miles. What we're doing with women going the extra mile is doing it without the hoopla, but we're going a few more miles than the women did on Pennsylvania Avenue. This is a 100-mile walk from Alexandria to Richmond, connecting the history of Alexandria as well as the Turning Point Suffrage Memorial in Occoquan, Virginia, in Nova Regional Park, to the Virginia Women's Monument on the Capitol grounds in Richmond. And both of these memorials honor the women of Virginia, and that's another purpose for our walk. There are so many wonderful, accomplished women in the Commonwealth of the past, the present, and what we know will be the future.
Sure, of course.
This is our time to rise back from the sand and claim our freedom. Talking about freedom.
I say, there have been a few setbacks, nothing that has delayed it greatly. But one evening in Quantico, Virginia, I had overloaded my backpack, knowing better, but I had, and I was on some gravel and stopped to adjust one of the straps of the backpack, and the whole backpack wanted to escape, I guess, and took me away with it. And I fell straight back and injured my hands and my wrists specifically, and had to have a series of x-rays over a couple of weeks. But I kept on going because just like women's rights in this country, we cannot go back. So there was no doubt I would continue. I think even if I had injured a leg or an ankle or a foot, I would have tried to continue, because this is important. And especially in our country now, to recognize that women are equal and always will be equal. And we are doing this for our daughters as well. And that is greatly important. We've gone through Fairfax, Prince William, Caroline, Stafford, Spotsylvania, Hanover, and Henrico counties. Let this walk not end here today. Let us continue to use our energies and, more importantly, our voices to achieve equality. Women endure. Women endure. Women empower. Women empower. Women engage. Women engage. Women encourage. Women encourage. Women are equal. Women are equal. Thank you. Yes, women have a voice, and I thank you for listening to mine. Thanks. You know, we all need to challenge ourselves from time to time and challenge our society. Young women are up-and-coming leaders of tomorrow. I have every confidence that our next generation of women will do absolutely outstanding, remarkable things for our nation and for our world. And I would say, if there's a takeaway from this for the next generation of women, don't ever give up. Stand up for your rights. You are equal in every sense of the word, and we all have talents and skills to share with the world and our nation. So never give up. Keep going like this walk. Never go back. Never backtrack. Just keep going ahead, because the future is the key, and we can't dwell on the past. We need to walk ahead.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that little bit of video. As we say, the walk from Alexandria to Richmond last August involved a three-pronged focus: women's history, women's health, and of course, women's equality. And if you notice some of the stats that were incorporated into the video, you know, we need to remember that this is 2024. And women's health care, for example, is not where it should be in the United States. And there was one stat in there that revealed that heart disease is still the #1 killer of women in this country. And women have, you know, historically been underrepresented in not only cardiovascular research, but health research in general. It wasn't until recently that if a woman went into an emergency room, would the emergency equipment fit a woman's anatomy? It was designed for men. And so I do want to add that in 2021, so just 3 years ago, heart disease was responsible for 1 in 5 deaths. The maternal mortality rate in the United States is off the charts right now, and it is increasing. A woman, who was had a large chance of not making it through that childbirth herself. If you're familiar, which I'm sure you are, with Carlisle House here in Alexandria, Mr. Carlisle's 2 wives both died in childbirth, Sarah and Sybil. So they had the means, they had the wealth, they had the servants, they had the best that money could buy at the time, and they still died in childbirth. So it didn't matter back then. It should matter today. We are the last developed nation. We fall last in rankings in maternal mortality in this country. And as I say, it is increasing. In 2021, for example, 1,200 women died of maternal causes in the United States. And I want to say that's compared with only 861 in 2020, the year before, and 754 in 2019. So you can see that this is increasing. Countries like the Netherlands, for example, have no real instances of women dying in childbirth. Breast cancer, we saw Mary Washington, George Washington's mother, died of breast cancer when she was 80 years old. And by the way, I did learn a few new health statistics along the journey last year. Some of the treatments for breast cancer in the 18th century included hemlock, arsenic paste, and something as simple as egg whites. And we don't know if the hemlock was applied or ingested, but 200 years from now, people will look at the way we did things, healthcare and other hygiene, other things, and wonder why we did things the way we did. But people, including many, many women, are still dying of breast cancer, and at early ages. There is a 1 in 8 chance in the United States that a woman will contract breast cancer in her lifetime. That's 13%. Also, I want to just touch on a couple of workplace statistics. We saw that currently women make 82 cents for every dollar a man makes, and that can be doing the same job. Women of color are especially affected, and in a negative way. And the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, even put women more behind. So what that means is the gains we've been making in corporate America and the workplace in general took a real hit. It started closing in the where we had made strides in the pay gap for women. Layoffs during the pandemic, lack of childcare, not only to mention the expense of childcare and having to balance that work-life scenario. Childcare costs way too much in the United States. And so we kind of went back on that one. Despite the major strides women in the US have made in the past century, gaps do persist in the glass ceiling. Overall, in 2023, among the 29 Organizations for Economic Cooperation and Development nations surveyed, only Sweden, Iceland, Finland, and Norway, the Scandinavian countries, listed as best countries for working women. So the US is currently at 19th globally in its treatment of women in the workplace. More than 30% of women in 2023 sat on company boards. 41% managed positions in the US. And again, this is especially true. The disparities for women of color are inexcusable. And we need to hopefully correct that in the country. The wage gap in the United States is one of the worst among countries around the globe. Childcare, as we say, costs a fortune. Black women, ever since the pandemic hit, are underrepresented in jobs with low wages and fewer benefits. But there is some good news in other areas. Voting, which of course is critically important, and Alexandria Celebrates Women encourages voter registration. Women are registered to vote in the United States at higher rates than men. This is according to the Center for Women in Politics at Rutgers. Virginia holds the lead in the number of U.S. counties named for women, and Virginia ranks 24th among the states in its number of women legislators. So there is some good news there. Now, if I can get back to telling you a little bit about the walk. The research for this, once I decided to do it, began about 9 months prior to the walk itself. And I spent many hours of in the Virginia room, for example, at the Kate Waller Barrett branch of the Alexandria Library. Thank you guys very much. There were many Zooms with women's organizations in the months preceding the walk. The Association for American University Women, for example, throughout the Commonwealth were very supportive. DAR chapters, for example, and many women's groups. And many women's groups came to our kickoff of August 5th, 2023, that was on the steps of the Kate Waller Barrett Library, you know, the famous site of the 1939 Civil Rights sit-in. I was researching trails. What trail do I go? I'm certainly not walking down I-95 from Alexandria to Richmond. So I used a trail called, and you may have noticed it in the video, the East Coast Greenway. Now that is a 3,000-mile trail, relatively new in the United States. It stretches from Maine to the Florida Keys, and the Virginia segment is said, and I can vouch for it, the most beautiful part of it all. But since the trail is new, much of it is on road, meaning you're walking literally on the roads, where the trail sections have not merged with another trail, existing trail, or been completed at all yet. And the East Coast Greenway Alliance, its Virginia director, Elliot Caldwell, I can't express the amount of help and knowledge that they imparted, and we appreciate that. I had to research, what equipment am I going to take? I'm not used to walking with a backpack, for example. And so what does one need? And I found out as I started the trek that very quickly, within a couple of days, you find out what you need to take and what you don't need to take, because the lighter the weight, the farther you're going to go. And in the middle of all this, well, let me say that the research was done over those 9 months, and then the physical training began in March of last year. I had been walking 3 to 5 miles a day anyway, but I increased that to 8 to 10 miles a day starting in March. And in the middle of all of this, I had one of my children was getting married, so the wedding planning and so on. So it was quite a hectic spring and summer. And you know, the people have asked me, why did you decide to do this? And my answer is, why not? And I would encourage everyone to sort of ask why not when we're faced with a challenge or want to take up a challenge. As a journalist, I'm used to research, I'm used to gathering stories. So one of the purposes for the walk was to gather oral histories, and I hope to write about it, and hopefully it'll become a shared book at the library sometime. So the video was the first project, the book is the second. But I would ask family and a few friends if I were crazy to undertake such a journey. And of course, I got mixed reactions on that. Some people said, "Oh yes, you are crazy," and others said I wasn't. My current boss has a very deep belly laugh, and he just said, "Ho ho ho, Converse, you will know you're crazy." So I took that as a good sign, though. But you know, when I grew up in the '60s, women had, aside from being stay-at-home mothers, a choice of about 3 occupations, as I recall: teacher, what was then called a secretary or a nurse. And I know my mother always encouraged her daughters to uh, do anything we wanted. She always said, women, anything that men can do, and we should try for the moon. Um, and so I think that kind of me, my interest in health research, in walking, and I'm a history nerd from way back. So those all combined for this project, and it seemed like the perfect project for me. Um, I'm not an athlete. I also wanted to do this walk. I'm a baby boomer, and to show that as long as we're physically capable, um, women can do something like this. It's physically exertive at any age, and we have to be very careful of falling. Statistically, we don't want to fall after age 65, for example, if we can avoid it. And I certainly did. And by the way, the again, the reason for the splints that I had to wear the remainder of the walk. Uh, um, when you know how we all break our falls instinctively with our hands, and that's what I did as the backpack took me back with it. And when I went in for x-rays, I had to come back to Alexandria twice over the weeks for 2 sets of x-rays and additional splints. I'd torn more tendons in one arm, for example. And but the doctors referred to that breaking the fall type of injury as a fush injury, which I find very interesting. Fush stands for falling on outstretched hands, and that's what the medical community uses, which I think is kind of cute. Um, this was done, no pun intended or pun intended, on a shoestring budget. During the 9 months of planning for this, we also, as an organization, was trying to raise funds for it. There were no campgrounds near the trail. We knew, so it would mean hopefully hotels. And again, starting and stopping was very important to me at the exact same place. Whatever step I was on, whatever porch I was on, whatever tree I was near, I started and stopped on consecutive days to keep it accurate. That was important to me, even though we weren't setting any land speed records or Guinness records with this walk. We gave ourselves, Alexandria Celebrates Women, we gave ourselves 3 weeks, a 3-week window for the walk, to account for weather. If you recall, last year at this time, we were just beginning to feel the effects of the Canadian wildfires. The air quality indexes weren't very good. So we were keeping an eye on that. Weather in general, I did have to call the walk one day because of tornado watches. So it was around noon one day, and we just ended it there. And should I become injured or ill or get lost, which by the way I did. So the idea was to finish in Richmond on Women's Equality Day, April 26th every year. And we did. So, but I was working at my job during this. This wasn't a 3-week vacation for me, I'm afraid. So I ended up, between lack of funding and work, and then the injuries, having to come home on some occasions and then start out early the next morning again to that exact stopping point. So I had rides to take me back and forth to the start-stop point some days. Other days I would get a $5 or $11 fare on the Northeast Regional on Amtrak. I rode some free buses to get to the train station in Fredericksburg, for example. And by the way, those experiences all added up too, because I met wonderful, wonderful people, wonderful women and families along the way. I remember the custodian, the woman working as a custodian at one of the bus stations in Fredericksburg, had a fascinating story and was extremely gracious and seemed very happy to be working and have an income. And I enjoyed speaking with her, and I will write about her. Um, so I also, a little bit of a personal note, when I was 18 years old, I was suffered a leg injury, a lower leg injury in an auto accident, car in which I was a passenger. And I have a funny looking right leg because of it. And so for me, I didn't publicize this, so you're the first to hear about it. But I wanted to do this sort of to prove to myself this hasn't stopped me from doing anything, and it won't. So so that was another reason. Um, One of the takeaways, something I really learned that I didn't expect on this journey was having to make split-second decisions sometimes involving my safety, involving what direction do I go. Of course, I had maps, I had a GPS, but still, you come to a literal fork in the road, or you're in the woods on a trail, and you think, okay, there are several trail signs here. Which one do I take? Where would I come back that night, or would I stay somewhere that night? How much time would I have to interview women along the trail on that particular day? So some evenings I would spend the entire evening once I got off the trail trying to configure, okay, what's the next day going to look like? So that was an interesting exercise in all of the mind work that kind of went with the physical work. When I injured my wrists and came back for one of the sets of X-rays and doctor visits, my former boss, the 18th U.S. Surgeon General, was in town in D.C., and she said, "I want to see you. You know, you've told me about your arms. I want to see you." And so I did take half a day and go to see her, and she checked me out as well. And then she, as you see in the video, was fully supportive of the walk. And I commend Dr. Benjamin too, because when she was Surgeon General, she hosted a number of walks across the country for fitness for all Americans. So thanks, Dr. Benjamin. I actually saw her yesterday. I was at a national public health conference, and she was speaking. I stopped along the way at different places to rest and to eat for a few minutes. And sometimes I'd be so far afield that I had to do, one day I had to do fast food for lunch, and I'm not a fast food fan. But it was the closest and the only thing around. And then one evening, all there was, and I don't want to say anything ill about a restaurant chain, but I ate at a Denny's, and I hadn't been in one of those for I don't know how many years. So I got the Grand Slam. I thought that was a safe thing to get. I did learn, and I'd been warned about this, to learn to drink the electrolyte drinks, the Gatorades, the Powerades, and I would end up drinking those at the end of the day, sitting on the curb at a gas station, and you know, while I plan my next move. So I have a very clear mental picture of that, and meeting people along the way. You know, there were a few not so nice people, but far and away, again, one of the main takeaways from this were those wonderful people. You know, one of the decisions I would have to make at a moment's notice was, Do I approach this stranger? Do I ask a direction? And you have to go with your gut. And by the way, I took a walking stick with me also for protection and a whistle. And uh, and we did not publicize that I would be doing the walk myself for safety reasons. We refer to it as Alexandria Celebrates Women as Walking, which was accurate as well. But people would offer to help. They'd offer to give me rides, which I would usually turn down unless it was a dangerous stretch of road on Route 1, historic Route 1. And there are some stretches there that the East Coast Greenway said you don't want to walk it or cycle it or run it. It is far too dangerous, no shoulder. And I find I did, despite their warnings, end up in some precarious situations more than a few times. I mentioned I got lost. I was in Hanover County one day and was following the bike trail, and it was all on road. And so I was walking in whatever grassy shoulder I could. And I would put my daughter had loaned me her bright yellow safety vest that she uses when she uses her bike. And she said, "Mom, wrap that vest around the back of your backpack so that cars can see you if you have to walk with cars coming behind you at any point." I tried to walk facing traffic, of course, as we should, but sometimes I would literally run out of shoulder and have to cross for a few minutes where traffic would be behind me. But that was a great tip. So thank you, Chandler, for that. But getting lost in Hanover County, I ended up on out in the country, very few houses, cornfields, some tobacco fields, that kind of thing. And am I going to get to civilization? And so finally, I saw a house, and I walked up into the home's front yard. It had an expansive lawn in front of it. And I hesitated. I didn't want to necessarily go to the door. But I sat under a tree for a while and called the Hanover County Sheriff's Department and explained my situation. And I said, "Is there any mass transportation here that would get me to the next gas station or the next group of businesses?" And the dispatch, who was a woman, was very helpful. When she asked a deputy to call me back, he wasn't one of the nicer people on the trip. And so finally, the resident of the home where I'd stopped had seen me, came out, brought me some water, and again, an example of wonderful people along the way, and directed me, but I still had to walk 2 more miles on these country roads to the nearest gas station. So that was not a pleasant day for me. I from their front lawn, I called one of the contacts for the walk, an historian in Richmond, and because I was closer to Richmond at that point, and I said, "Tess, this is what's happened. This is where I am. I want somebody to know that I'm trying to get further down the road here." So one time I ended up literally in a ditch, a very deep ditch. I lost my footing, and it was in the country. And I can remember saying out loud to myself as I was navigating, trying to get out of this ditch, "No snakes, no snakes, no snakes." I was terrified, but luckily there weren't any reptiles that I saw, and I got back on the road. So, again, a mixture of good and bad, of risk and reward, I would say. The oral histories I gathered along the way, I found absolutely fascinating. I stopped in the Rappahannock Regional Library, for example, did some further research one morning, and it's amazing. I applaud all of you librarians out there as well. Thank you, thank you, thank you for the work you do every day. Um, I stopped in visitor centers in towns and tourism boards in counties, Stafford County, for example, and did a few talks. Um, uh, and it just was, oh, I don't know, I guess, we use the term life-changing experience all the time. I don't know if it changed my life, but I would highly recommend a solo something trip of some kind if you can do it, whether it's a day trip, an hour or longer, um, because I found that it does make one think beyond themselves and about the world in general. It If you're outdoors doing this, appreciation of nature. I know on my walk to Richmond, if a nice breeze would come up, I would just take a beat and sort of inhale it, just soak it all in. Or if I was passing something especially beautiful or came upon a, a species of wildflower with which I wasn't familiar, I would sort of remember it. I remember walking through a lot of kudzu on a covered sidewalk, and black and green crickets were coming out of the kudzu as I walked. So the kind of experiences that don't come in a car trip or on a jet airplane, for example. So it was oh, I don't know, a wonderful, wonderful experience. And Alexandria has so many women, as well as the entire Commonwealth, women of achievement, and we're still going strong. Alexandria, some of its more notable women in its history include Margaret Brent, who was the first woman on this continent in the 1600s. She lived in Maryland and down near St. Mary's, what is St. Mary's City today. Came from England, was tutored in the law by her father. Women legally could not have an education back then, and became Lord Calvert of Maryland's attorney and settled his estate. So one day, Margaret took herself to the Maryland legislature, of course, all men, and asked for 2 votes for women, one for herself and one representing Lord Calvert. Of course, the men denied her that vote, but she was the first woman to ask for that. Margaret owned land on what is now much of Alexandria. And Anne Ball McCarthy Ramsey, married to William Ramsey, one of the founders of Alexandria. In the 18th century, women traditionally, there wasn't a law to this effect that we can find, but traditionally it was frowned upon for women of the middle or upper social classes to work outside of their home. And people got around this, especially merchants in the city, because they would have their shops on the ground floor of their home. That was the case with the Ramseys. And so as Anne worked in the shop, she knew that with all the talk of the oncoming American Revolution, Alexandria was founded in 1749. So as the years went by and the talk increased of revolution, Anne knew that Alexandria would have widows, would have orphans, would have young men needing boots and other equipment going to fight the fight. And so she would solicit money from her friends and neighbors as they entered her husband's shop. And Anne Ball McCarthy Ramsey, by the way, she was a cousin of Mary Ball Washington. And the Ramseys and Washingtons were great friends and socialized as well. But Anne ended up raising more than $75,000. Now, this is in 18th century currency, and sent it all to Cousin George for the Continental Army. And George Washington and his peers praised Anne Ball McCarthy Ramsey for her philanthropy and kindness. And I like to think about it this way. Who knows, maybe that money that Anne raised was the tipping point, helped the Continental Army win that conflict. And where would we be as a country today if she hadn't done that? People like Annie B. Rose, whose father had been an enslaved person, did so much for the city of Alexandria, for women and women of color and people of color to vote, voter education, housing authority, and the Annie B. Rose House is dedicated to her as well. She was also responsible for what was then the Black Library, becoming the Alexandria Black History Museum. Harriet Jacobs, a former enslaved woman from South Carolina, teamed up with a white relief worker from Rhode Island, Julia Wilbur, during the American Civil War here, when the Union Army, had commandeered most homes and businesses, more than 30, to serve as hospitals for wounded Union and Confederate soldiers. There were segregated buildings scheduled for troops of color. Wilbur and Jacobs were assigned to one of these, and you can see the location. It's on South Washington Street today. And the commander in charge of that hospital was hoarding supplies, blankets, bedding, medicine, and not opening up the hospital to anyone. And so imagine this, when women weren't expected to make their voices known, and you have a former enslaved woman, a woman of color as well, they decided one day they'd had enough and took it to the commander of the Union forces in this entire area. And they walked in, presented their case about this terrible commander at the hospital, and they were successful and got the supplies needed and the hospital open. So those are just a few of the stories of famous Alexandrians, heroines that we don't often hear about. And as I say, Alexandria women keep going, as do all the women of the Commonwealth. There are stories and stories and stories. Alexandria Celebrates Women has a column once a month in the paper, and I write about women's history in that. The next column, which should come out in the next week or so, will be on one of the women that was highlighted in the video just now, the Eagle Lady. And so even though she's not Alexandria, she's very close. She was from Mason Neck, and her story is quite lovely. And she battled her battles in the 1960s. And when we think about that time period, women didn't have much say at that point either. So we've come a long way in many ways and still have a long way to go. We did have another walk. We called it Making History to DC last Saturday. And I led a group of about 30 women into from Old Town Alexandria up the Mount Vernon Trail, beautiful trail by the Potomac, which is also part of the East Coast Greenway. And we partnered with Friends of the Mount Vernon Trail and Walk Arlington, for example, Alex Dog Walks. There were so many organizations that were helpful to us. And we walked into the Lincoln Memorial area. We walked to Lady Bird Johnson Park. We walked across the Memorial Bridge and ended at the Vietnam Women's Memorial near the Lincoln. At the Lincoln, we spoke about Marian Anderson. And at Lady Bird Johnson Park, of course, we talked about Lady Bird Johnson and her beautification program. And We had talks about Arlington Cemetery and the famous women who lie at rest there. So we broke it up, and we even took our own lunches. So we broke it up with about 5 history talks, and we will be doing more of those. And also, I wrote a women's history tour of Alexandria, 3 or 4 years ago now. I'd like to invite any of you to just get in touch with us through alexandriacelebrateswomen.com. It's free. It can be as long or as short. There's an extended version of it, and we'd love to take you at any time. So I'd love to be your guide. So just get in touch with us. I want to leave some time. I don't know the time, Caroline, with questions here, but I do want to mention we've also started at Alexandria Celebrates Women something we're calling women's salons. It's an opportunity to take a topic or a panel, and then women can talk and talk and talk and exchange ideas. The first one we had was last month, and it was on why women run for politics. And we had women, current city council members in Alexandria, and those running, and it was fascinating. We had 70 women there. And I'm also privileged to be a member of the Alex 275. That is celebrating Alexandria's 275th birthday this year in 2024, and America 250, where in 2026 we will celebrate America's birthday. And part of that is an oral history project in Alexandria. When I talk about women having voices, and we should, children should have voices, men have voices. We want to encourage everyone to contact and go to the alexandriavirginia.gov website, look up the Alexandria Oral History Project, and put your own story on there, because your own story is important to our community and our country. Alexandria Celebrates Women, you know, our motto is celebrating women of the past, present, and the future. And I want to share with you today that I think you're all a part of that. One organization and one person can make a difference. And so I encourage you to take a moment today, and actually every day, and celebrate your courage, as the library is doing and sponsoring, and celebrate yourselves as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Gail, so much. I did post the website for Alexandria Celebrates Women. Hopefully I spelled it correctly, but it's in the chat, as well as if you would like to see additional library programs. And thank you for your kind words, Gail, about librarians. I'm so glad that you had a chance to visit the Rappahannock Library. I think I
Yes.
mentioned, yeah.